Japan just sent Ukraine a number of Humvee-style Toyota military vehicles. Yes, that sentence is real, and somewhere a Russian logistics officer just felt a chill run down his spine because Ukrainians do not receive vehicles like this and use them for calm, normal activities. Hey friends, Wes O'Donnell here, and here's a fun fact. When I was a teenager, I took kendo classes because, well, everybody was doing karate because of Karate Kid, and I wanted to be different, so I picked feudal Japanese sword fighting because that's real relevant when you're an adult. Oh, you want to fight? Well, just wait here. Let me just go get my katana. Anyways, my master was teaching us a Japanese word of the day, and one time he said, and today I'm going to teach you how to say, "You're welcome." And then he said, "Don't touch my mustache." I'm like, that's "you're welcome" in Japanese? And he's like, yeah, "Dotoshimoshite." Anyways, today we're breaking down Japan's Toyota high mobility vehicle, the HMV, and why a simple truck donation from Tokyo matters more than people think. Now, this is not an Archer, it's not a Tempest, it's not some of these really cool weapons that we've been talking about over the last few videos on my channel, but it is something scarier to Russia. Mobility at scale, reliability, and a logistics backbone that does not melt when it touches mud. Japan's embassy in Ukraine confirmed the delivery of Toyota HMVs as part of a new aid package. Now, the Ministry of Defense and Japan's self-defense forces agreed to supply 30 vehicles total. The final batch of 14 reportedly arrived in Poland on January 12th, which completes the transfer. But along with the vehicles, Japan also shipped 2 containers of medical supplies. That detail is cool because it tells you the intent. This is about keeping people alive and keeping units moving, not about headline hunting. If you're wondering why Poland shows up in that sentence, that's because the reality of this war supply chain, Ukraine's rear area is not a peaceful rear. It is a contested corridor. Poland remains one of the key arteries. Okay, so what is the Toyota HMV? Well, the Toyota high mobility vehicle is Japan's homegrown answer to a familiar military problem. In the 1990s, Japan needed to modernize its light tactical mobility fleet, replacing the older American Jeeps and trucks, and move troops and gear reliably across roads, dirt, snow, and everything in between. Think of it as a functional analog to the US Humvee, not identical, not a copy, but living in the same tactical neighborhood. Its weight sits roughly in the 2.5 to 3 ton range. Payload can reach about 1 ton. And troop capacity is often described as 8 to 10 fully equipped personnel, depending on configuration. Power comes from a diesel engine, typically described in the 150 to the 170 horsepower range, and highway speed is commonly cited around 100 kilometers per hour. In Ukraine, those numbers translate into something simple. A vehicle like this can keep up with the fight. The configuration Ukraine appears to be getting suggests Ukraine is receiving soft-top variants, lightweight versions with a tarp cover. Now, that likely means these are optimized for transport, medical movement, command and control, and general logistics rather than frontline direct fire roles. Otherwise, it would need more drone protection on the roof. So this choice makes sense. Soft-top does not mean useless. Soft-top means flexible, lighter, easier to maintain, easier to repair, easier to modify if you want to make it into a counter-drone truck, and less painful when you need to move it across a broken bridge or tow it out of a ditch in February. If you want a Humvee to eat bullets, you armor it. If you want a Humvee to win a war of movement, you keep it mobile, and you keep it light, and you keep it running. Here's the mistake people make. They treat logistics vehicles like background props, like they're just there to haul crates while the real systems do the fighting. Well, in Ukraine, mobility is combat power. If you can move infantry faster, you can reinforce threatened sectors. If you can move drones, batteries, and operators faster, you can keep pressure on Russian positions without giving them time to adapt. If you can evacuate wounded faster, you keep your units from bleeding out. They're experienced people. Now, Russia has learned repeatedly that Ukraine's biggest strength is not one magic weapon, it is tempo. Ukraine shifts, adapts, and shows up where Russia thought it would not, where Russia didn't expect. Vehicles like the HMV feed that tempo. Now, let's talk about the part nobody wants to admit because it sounds boring. Reliability is lethal. Toyota has a global reputation for making vehicles that keep running. Military variants are a different beast than civilian trucks, but the design culture matters. If a vehicle is easy to service, tolerant of abuse, and supported by a broad ecosystem of know-how, it stays in the fight. Russia's vehicle story in Ukraine has been a comedy of errors. Except the punchline is conscripts walking, tires, maintenance, logistics discipline, spare parts shortages, and the general Russian inability to plan beyond the next conscript going AWOL have turned the second army in the world into a parade of broken trucks. Ukraine does not have the luxury of that kind of incompetence. It needs vehicles that start every day. Now, the HMV's modular design matters because it is a platform. It can be configured for troop movement, cargo, comms, or light weapons mounts. The baseline versions have limited ballistic protection, but that's not a surprise. Light tactical vehicles tend to trade protection for mobility. But upgraded models do exist with reinforced protection and bullet-resistant glass. Ukraine, being Ukraine, will likely adapt what it receives. That does not necessarily mean turning every HMV into a gun truck. Sometimes the best use is less dramatic. A reliable comms vehicle, a medevac shuttle, a drone team carrier with racks for batteries and antennas and spares, a rapid repair and recovery node, a vehicle for moving electronic warfare teams, the people who keep Russian drones blind and confused. If you want to get really specific, the HMV format pairs well with the way Ukraine fights with small, distributed teams. A few people, a few systems, a lot of movement, and a constant attempt to stay off Russia's targeting cycle. Now, Japan has constraints, both political and legal, around defense exports and military aid. Even with those constraints, Japan has steadily expanded support to Ukraine over time. Sending a military vehicle is not the same as sending a missile system. Although Japan did loan Ukraine the use of its synthetic aperture radar satellite, which I made a video about in the past, but it still signals commitment and it still strengthens Ukraine's ability to sustain the war. Also, Japan announced it would accelerate disbursement of $3.9 billion in financial aid, front-loading part of it into the first half of 2026. That's now, to help Ukraine manage expected budget shortfalls. That's big because wars are not only won by tactics, they're won by a state staying functional. So these HMVs will likely end up doing the jobs that quietly decide whether units live or die. They will move people and supplies across dangerous roads. They will support drone teams, the ones doing the constant reconnaissance and the strike work. They will support medical evacuation and casualty movement. They will help commanders keep formations cohesive when Russia tries to break the system with pressure and chaos. A small fleet of 30 vehicles won't transform the entire front overnight, but it can absolutely transform the survivability and the effectiveness of units that receive them. And that is how aid actually works in this war. It's not always about the one big announcement. It's about the repeated injections of capability that keep Ukraine sharp. So here's the big picture. Japan sending Toyota HMVs is one more example of how Ukraine is being built into a Western-aligned force in real time. Not only through tanks and missiles, but through the unglamorous backbone, mobility, sustainment, medical support, and the ability to keep moving while Russia burns through its own equipment. This is also a reminder that Ukraine's war is forcing democracies to rethink what meaningful aid looks like. Sometimes it's an air defense system. Sometimes it's a truck that starts in the cold and does not quit. Russia can handle a headline. Russia struggles against an ecosystem, and every time another country adds a piece to that ecosystem, well, the Kremlin's timeline gets a little bit worse. Japan's Toyota HMV is not a superweapon. It is a war enabler. It keeps Ukraine moving. It keeps Ukraine supplied. It keeps people alive. And a fleet of reliable vehicles is Japan's resistance with an engine. That's it for today, my friends. If you want more breakdowns like this, consider subscribing. It helps me push back on Russian disinformation, and I'll keep translating this war into plain language. Until next time, dotoshimoshite, or don't touch my mustache. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.